The morning it all came apart. My own son stood in my dead husband's greenhouse and told me I had robbed my family. Grady's voice cracked the way it used to when he was a boy losing an argument he'd already lost. "You can't sell it, Mom," he said. "Half this house is mine. My name's on the deed. You put it there yourself." Behind him, his wife Sloane didn't say one word. She just watched me the way you watch a clock you're waiting on. I laid my hand flat on Vern's old potting bench, the one he hammered together the year we got married, and I looked at my boy, and I told him God's honest truth. "You're right, honey. Half of it is yours. And the other half just learned how to say no. My name is Corinne Fenwick. I'm 72 years old. And that fall, in the soggiest corner of Oregon, I finally quit mistaking my own fear for love. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments. And please stay with me until the end. Because what happened in that greenhouse didn't start with a shouting match. It started years before, with a kindness I was so sure I had gotten right. The first time I knew something was off. It was a Tuesday, and the whole valley was socked in with fog. I'd gone out back before coffee, the way I do, robe on over my nightgown, slippers already soaking through the wet grass. Out here past Portland, the fall comes in gray and stays gray, and the mornings drip off the maples like the trees are still crying about summer. I like it. I always have. Vern used to say the two of us were built for weather nobody else wanted, and I guess that's about the size of it. I was halfway to the greenhouse when I saw them. Little wooden stakes, maybe a dozen, driven into my lawn in a line I hadn't put there. Orange plastic ribbon tied to the tops of them, hanging limp and heavy with dew. They ran right along the edge of my property and then cut in, close to the greenhouse. Close enough that one of them stood not 3 feet from the door Vern built with his own 2 hands. I stood there in the fog with my heart doing something funny in my chest. Somebody had been on my land with a measuring tool. Somebody had walked my grass and driven stakes into it and tied their little orange flags and gone home. And nobody had said boo to me about it. Now I want you to understand the greenhouse, because everything that came after grew out of that little glass room. Vern raised it the summer after his first heart scare, back in 2016, when the doctor told him to slow down, and he decided the way to slow down was to build a whole new building by hand. It's nothing fancy. Cedar frame gone silver with age. Old windows he salvaged off a church they tore down on Fillmore. A door that sticks in July and swings free in January. But inside it smells like warm dirt and tomato leaves 12 months out of the year. And that's where I go when the house gets too quiet. Which, since Vern passed in 2021, is most of the time. So you can imagine how I felt seeing those stakes crowded up against it like teeth. That's about when I heard the truck. Grady's rig came up the gravel too fast, the way he's driven since he was 17, and pulled in crooked. Sloane was riding shotgun in a camel coat that cost more than my monthly grocery bill, and she saw me first. Her hand went to Grady's arm before he'd even shut the engine off. He climbed out and came across the yard with that look he gets, jaw already set, like he's decided to be mad before he knows what about. "Morning, Mom," he said, and then he caught sight of me standing over the stakes, and something flickered behind his eyes. "What are you doing out here in your robe? You'll catch your death." I didn't answer that. I asked him what the stakes were. "Oh, those," he said, and he waved a hand like he was shooing a fly. "That's nothing. Just had a fella come out and check the lot lines. For the insurance. You know how it is. The old surveys from the 70s, probably off by a foot. Nothing for you to worry about, Mom. For the insurance." He said it so smooth. And here's the thing about my son. Grady's not a cruel man. I raised him better than that. Or I thought I did. But he's always been the type to smooth a thing over instead of tell it straight. And standing there in the wet grass, I felt that old familiar tug, the one every mother knows, the one that says, "Let it go. Don't make a fuss. He's your boy and he loves you." So I let it go. God help me. I let it go. Sloane came up beside him and kissed the air near my cheek, and told me the greenhouse was looking a little tired, wasn't it? And maybe come spring they could help me clear some of it out. Lighten your load. Corinne, she said, you've earned a rest. I said something polite. I always say something polite. It's a thing you learn. Being a woman of a certain age, you learn to keep a soft answer in your apron pocket at all times, so you can hand one over quick and keep a little of your dignity while you do it. They didn't stay long. And after their taillights disappeared down the road, I pulled one of those stakes clean out of the ground and held it, and the dirt was still crumbling off the point of it. And I thought, somebody paid good money for this. Surveys aren't free. You don't spend real money checking lot lines you aren't planning to do something with. But I didn't have the whole picture yet, not even close. To understand why 12 little orange flags put such a chill in me, you've got to go back. You've got to know about Vern, and about the garden, and about the deed I signed in 2016 with my own hand, thinking the whole while that I was doing right by everybody. Vern Fenwick was the most patient man the good Lord ever made, and I say that as a woman who tried that patience for 47 years. We didn't start with much. Our first place had radiators that banged all winter like somebody trapped in the pipes. And a kitchen so narrow Vern used to joke we could cook supper and wash up without ever moving our feet. He worked for the county, parks and grounds, 40 years of it. And he came home every evening smelling like cut grass and two-stroke oil, and something green underneath that I can't name even now. His hands were always a little dirty in the creases no matter how he scrubbed. I used to tease him about it. Now I'd give the rest of my teeth to hold one of those dirty hands again. The man could grow anything. That was his gift. Me, I did the books. 31 years I spent as a paralegal and bookkeeper down at Ambrose and Sackett, a little two-lawyer firm off the square, and I know my way around a deed and a trust and a lien the way Vern knew his way around a root ball. Between the two of us, we figured we had life about covered. He kept things alive and I kept things filed. That was the joke of our marriage. The heart of that garden, and I mean the literal heart of it, was the apple tree. Vern grafted it himself. If you've never seen it done, grafting is a strange kind of surgery. You take a cutting off one tree, a variety you love, and you cut a wound into the trunk of another, a rootstock, some tough old thing that can survive our clay soil and our wet feet. Then you bind the cutting into the wound and you wait. And if you did it right, the two grow together into one tree. The roots of one, the fruit of the other. Vern had 4 different apples grafted onto that single trunk. Come October, it'd give you a Gravenstein off one branch and a Northern Spy off the next, all from the same tree. And folks who saw it never could get over it. He told me once, wiping his hands on his jeans, that grafting only works if the graft and the host really want the same thing. Put the wrong cutting on a good tree, he said, and it won't just fail. A bad graft will take. It'll root right into the heartwood and drink the whole tree dry from the inside. And by the time the leaves tell you something's wrong, it's already too late to cut it loose. I nodded along the way you do when your husband gets philosophical over his coffee. I did not understand yet that he was handing me the truest warning of my whole life, and that in a few short years I would ignore it, and it would cost me nearly everything I had left. Inside the greenhouse, tucked on a shelf above the potting bench, Vern kept a garden journal, a fat spiral notebook, soft at the corners, filled with his blocky pencil printing, frost dates, which apples set fruit and which ones sulked, when to start the tomatoes under lights, and folded into the back of it, held with a rubber band that had gone brittle and snapped, he kept the papers that mattered, the warranty on the well pump, a spare house key in a little envelope, and things I didn't go looking through, not for years, because opening that notebook was like hearing his voice come from the next room, and some mornings I just couldn't take it. I should have gone looking sooner. There was a letter in there with my name on it, and it had been waiting for me since the same summer he built the greenhouse. But I'm getting ahead of the story, and Vern always said a garden and a good telling both take their own sweet time. So let me back up and tell you about the deed. But before I can tell you about the deed, I have to tell you about the Sunday that sent me digging for it. It was maybe 2 weeks after the stakes. Grady and Sloane came out for supper the way they'd taken to doing that fall, and they brought Wren with them, which was the only part of those visits I still looked forward to. Wren's my granddaughter, 16 that year, all elbows and quiet, with her grandfather's habit of watching a room before she said anything in it. She came through my door and dropped her backpack and asked could she help me with the biscuits, and I about cried right there over the flour, because nobody else in that family had offered to help me with a single thing in longer than I could remember. Sloane came in behind her carrying a bakery pie still in the plastic clamshell, which is her way, and set it on my counter next to the pie I'd already made from scratch, which is also her way. She had on that smile she wears, the one that's real friendly right up until you notice it never quite gets all the way up to her eyes. Something smells amazing, Corinne, she said, and then sniffing, in that same breath. Though it's awful warm in here, isn't it? You must run that furnace day and night. Bless your heart. All this house for just you. I told her I only run it warm when I've got company, which is the kind of answer that sounds sweet and means back off, and she smiled like I'd agreed with her. We ate. It was fine. Grady talked about a job thing he was vague about, and I noticed he'd gone thin in the face and heavy under the eyes. And the mother in me wanted to ask what was eating him, but you can't ask Grady a straight question at the table without him treating it like an ambush. So I let him be. Sloane pushed her food around and told me twice how the garden must be getting to be a lot for me now. And wasn't the back step a little high? She'd hate for me to take a spill out there all alone with nobody to hear me. Wren looked up from her plate at that. Just looked. From her mother to me and back. The way you'd watch two people playing a game of cards you didn't fully understand. That girl doesn't miss much. Keep that in your pocket, because it matters later. After I was in the kitchen running the tap over the plates, and the water was loud, and I think that's the only reason they got careless. Grady and Sloane had drifted into the dining room, and their voices came low under the sound of the faucet, and I wasn't trying to listen. I want you to know that. A mother isn't always trying to listen. Sometimes the words just find you. Sloane said something I didn't catch, low and quick, and then clear as a bell, in a tone like she was tired of waiting. She said, "So when," and Grady said, "Hush," and then he said the thing. "Relax," he said. "She's not going to put up a fight over it. Half of it's already ours anyway. Her name won't even be the only one on the paperwork when the time comes. Half of it's already ours." I stood there with a plate in my hand and the water running hot over my knuckles, and I did not feel it burn. Half of it, ours. He didn't say the house. He didn't say Mom's place. He said ours. And he said it plain, like a fact he'd checked, like a number he'd already run. Now here is where being who I am cut both ways. 31 years I sat at a desk and watched families come through that law office at the worst moment of their lives, fighting over land and Mama's ring and who got the lake cabin. And I filed the papers on every kind of heartbreak you can imagine. So when my own boy said half of it's already ours, some cold professional part of me woke up out of a long sleep and started paying attention in a way the mother in me did not want it to. Because that isn't loose talk. Half of it's already ours is not a thing a man says by accident. That is a man who has looked at a document. I set the plate down real careful, because if I dropped it, they'd have come running. And then we'd have all had to stand around talking about how I was getting shaky in my old age instead of about what he'd just said. I dried my hands. I finished the dishes. I told them good night, and I hugged my granddaughter a beat too long, and I watched their taillights go down the gravel. And then I went out to the greenhouse in the dark, in my slippers again, and I turned on the little work light over Vern's bench, and I took down his journal, and I dug out the deed. I already knew what I was going to find. That's the part that shames me even now. I didn't need to check. I checked anyway, the way you press on a bruise to make sure it still hurts. There it was, in the county's dull gray photocopy. The legal description of our lot, the acre and change Vern and I bought in 1978, a couple of years before Grady ever came along. And down in the ownership, two names: Vernon A. Fenwick, Corinne M. Fenwick, and then added below in a different filing, dated the summer of 2016. A third line I had put there myself: Grady V. Fenwick, joint tenant, with full rights of survivorship. I want to walk you through what that means, because the whole rest of this story turns on it, and I don't want you lost. When you own a house in joint tenancy with somebody, you don't each own a separate half you can point to. You own the whole thing together, the both of you, all the way through, like two hands around one cup, and with rights of survivorship. When one of you dies, the other one doesn't inherit your share. There's nothing to inherit. Your part just evaporates, and the survivor is left holding the whole cup, free and clear, and no will on God's earth can change it. It skips the courts entirely. That's the reason folks do it. That's the reason I did it. Because here's the thing you have to understand, and it's the hardest thing I'll tell you in this whole story. Nobody tricked me into signing that. I did it on purpose. I did it with my eyes open. I did it because I loved my son. Let me take you back to that summer. It was 2016, the same season Vern was out back building the greenhouse to prove he wasn't dying. He'd had his first heart scare that spring, a bad one, a night in the hospital with wires stuck all over him, and me sitting in a plastic chair listening to a monitor beep and thinking, this is it. This is the night. And it wasn't, thank God, but it changed me. It put a cold little clock in my chest that's been ticking ever since. I started thinking about paperwork, about Grady having to sit in a lawyer's office grieving and signing things, the way I'd watched 100 strangers do. And I thought, I can spare him that. I know how. It's my whole trade. I'll just add him to the deed as a joint tenant, and when Vern and I are both gone, the house passes to Grady clean. No probate, no lawyers, no 18 months of court. A gift, the last neat, loving thing his mother's expertise could do for him. I brought it to Vern out in the half-built greenhouse, with sawdust in his hair, and I laid it out proud as you please. And my husband, who almost never told me no in 47 years, set down his hammer and told me no. Don't do it, Corinne, he said. Not like that. Not while we're living. I asked him why on earth not. I explained the probate, the fees, the delay. I had my facts all lined up in a row the way I do, and he wiped his hands on his jeans, the way he always did before he said something he meant. And he said, "You're not putting his name on it. You're putting his weight on it. You graft him onto this while we're still standing here living in it. And whatever's wrong in his life, whatever debts or troubles come to him down the road, they come to this house too. You can't put a person on your land and keep their life off it. It doesn't work that way." He looked at me a long minute and he said, "Leave it to him in the will, honey. Give it to him after we're gone. Don't tie him into the trunk while the tree's still growing." And I told my husband he was being dramatic. I told him he didn't understand the law the way I did, which, may God forgive me, was true and was also the single most foolish thing I have ever said to another living soul. Because Vern didn't understand the law. He understood people, and he understood grafting. And it turns out those were the only two things I needed to understand, and the two things I was too proud to learn. I filed it that August. I signed my own name and I had Grady sign his, and I recorded it at the county myself. And I felt good about it. I felt like a smart woman taking care of her family. Vern never brought it up again. He just went back to building his greenhouse. And the next spring, he grafted that fourth apple onto the tree. And he never once said, "I told you so." Not even years later when the first crack showed, because that wasn't the kind of man he was. He died in the spring of 2021, and the survivorship did just what I built it to do. His share of the house passed to me overnight. No court, no cost. Clean as I'd promised. For 4 years I lived in it thinking I'd been so wise. And now I was standing in his greenhouse at 11 o'clock at night, holding that gray photocopy, my son's voice still going in my ears. Half of it's already ours. And I finally understood what Vern had tried to tell me over the noise of his own hammer. I hadn't given my boy a gift. I'd grafted him onto everything I owned. And something had gone wrong in the graft, some rot I couldn't see yet, and it had already put its roots down into the heartwood of my house. The question that kept me up the rest of that night wasn't whether Grady meant to take it. It was how far the rot had already gone, and who, exactly, had put a survey crew on my lawn. I didn't sleep much that night, and by morning I'd made myself a promise. I wasn't going to accuse anybody of anything. I was going to do what I do best, which is find out, quietly, on paper, the way I'd found out the truth of 100 other people's messes across that desk downtown. The difference being this one had my own son's name on it, and my own hand had signed it there. For a couple weeks I just watched, and I let them think I hadn't heard a thing. And Lord, once I was watching for it, it was everywhere. It's like when you learn a new word and then you hear it 6 times in a day. The campaign had been running a good while. I just hadn't had the ears for it. Sloane was the smooth one. She never once said, "We want your house." She was too sharp for that. Instead, she'd leave things lying around like she'd forgotten them. A glossy brochure for a senior living place out on the parkway. All silver-haired folks laughing over watercolor class. Propped up against my sugar bowl like it had wandered in on its own. "Oh, that," she'd say when I picked it up. "My girlfriend's mother just moved into one of those. She says it's the best decision she ever made. No cooking, no yard, no stairs. Somebody around all the time in case you fall." She'd let that last word sit there. Fall, like it was already scheduled. I told her I wasn't planning on falling, and if I did, I'd holler, and she laughed like I'd made a joke instead of drawn a line. Grady worked a different angle. His was worry, which is the meanest one, because you can't get mad at worry without looking like you're the problem. He'd come by and rattle the back railing and frown and say it felt loose, though it had passed every inspection when we bought the place. He'd ask, was I still climbing the little stepladder to change the bulbs? Because I really shouldn't be doing that at my age. He asked, real casual. One afternoon over coffee I'd made him and he never thanked me for. Whether I'd ever gotten around to updating my will, and where did I keep all my important papers anyhow, in case, God forbid, something happened and he needed to find them fast. In case something happened. My son, thumbing through the idea of my death like a man checking a mailbox to see if a check had come. And then Sloane started in on my things. Not mean, never mean out loud. Just, she'd stand in my living room and look around it the way she looks at a listing. "A house should really be full of a family," she said one Sunday, running her eyes over the front room and the good light through the big windows. "All this room. It's a shame, really, to see it wasted." Wren's hands went still on the dish towel when her mother said that. Grady heard it too. I watched his shoulders come up around his ears, but he didn't say a word. He didn't say, "This is Mom's home." He didn't say, "That's enough." He just let it sit in the air, and that silence hurt me worse than anything Sloane put into words. Because cruelty you can see coming. It's the silence of the people who are supposed to love you that sneaks up behind and takes your knees out. Now here's a thing I need you to hold on to, because it comes back around and it matters more than any of it. All through those weeks, little pieces of the truth kept finding their way to me. And at the time, I chalked it up to luck, or to God, or to an old woman finally paying attention. It wasn't any of those. But I didn't know that yet. The first piece came on a Thursday. Wren had stayed after supper to help me put away the dishes, just the two of us. And she was drying a glass real slow, taking her time with it. And she said, not looking at me, kind of careful, "Grandma, did some man named Dane ever call you back? He called the house last week when I was here alone." I picked up because I thought it might be you. I said I didn't know any Dane. "Who was he?" She kept her eyes on the glass. "He said he was a contractor. He said he was calling to confirm the site walk for the permit. Something about an ADU." She spelled the letters out, unsure of them. "He asked, was this the Fenwick property?" And I said yes, and he said, "Great. Tell your dad they're all set for the 15th. Then he hung up. I kept my face still, the way you learned to. I asked her, gentle as I could, did you tell your daddy he called? And Wren looked up at me then, and I swear that girl had her grandfather's eyes exactly, steady and old for her years. And she said, no, told you. I didn't understand the whole weight of that yet. I filed it away as a strange lucky thing, a child mishearing a wrong number. But an ADU, I knew what that was. Accessory dwelling unit. A rental. A second little house you build in the backyard and rent out for income. And there's only one flat, sunny cleared spot on my whole acre big enough to drop one on. It's where the greenhouse stands. They weren't dreaming about the future anymore. They'd hired a man. They'd picked a date, the 15th. Somebody had already applied, or was about to, for a permit to put a rental unit on my land, right on top of the little glass room my husband built with his dying strength. And not one of them had said a single word to me, the woman whose name is on the deed, because in their minds, half of it was already theirs. Why ask the other half? That was twist enough to knock the wind out of me. But it wasn't the bottom, not even close, because now the paralegal in me was wide awake, and she wanted to know how a man builds a rental on land that isn't clear. And that meant it was time to stop watching the family and start reading the record. So one gray morning, I put on my navy cardigan and drove myself down to the county building, the same one Vern worked out of 40 years. And I pulled our property file. Everybody thinks that stuff is secret. It isn't. It's public as a park bench. Anybody can walk in and read what's recorded against a piece of land. And I'd done it for strangers 1,000 times. So I did it for myself. I found the deed I already knew about. My name, Vern's, and Grady's, joint tenants. And then I found the thing I didn't know about, and my hands went cold right there at the counter. There was a lien recorded against the property, a judgment lien. Somebody had taken my son to court and won, and the court had entered a judgment against him for a sum of money that made my mouth go dry. And that creditor had done exactly what a smart creditor does. They'd recorded their judgment against every scrap of real estate Grady's name was attached to, which meant it was attached to my house, my home, the acre Vern and I bought in 1978. The greenhouse, all of it, was now carrying a stranger's claim because my son owed a debt I'd never heard a whisper about, and I had personally, with my own proud hand, tied his name and everything that came with it into my land. I stood at that counter a long moment. The clerk asked, was I all right? Ma'am, and I said I was fine. And I asked her, real quiet, in the flat voice you use, so you don't cry in a government building, whether a creditor with a judgment lien like that could ever force a sale of the property to collect. And she was kind, and she said she couldn't give legal advice, but that yes, ma'am, in Oregon, a judgment creditor can bring an action to sell the debtor's interest. And depending, sometimes the whole property gets caught up in it. Depending, sometimes the whole property. There it was. The rot Vern warned me about finally showed all the way through. It wasn't just that Grady wanted the house. It was worse than wanting. My son had brought a debt into my life without telling me, and that debt was a rope tied around my whole home. And there was a stranger on the other end of that rope who could, if he chose to, pull my house right out from under me to satisfy what Grady owed him. And I never signed up for that man. I never met him. I just, in my love and my pride, left the door open. I drove home so careful I got honked at twice for going slow. I didn't cry. I was past crying by then, into that cold, clear country on the other side of it. I did make myself do one thing before I fell apart. That evening, Grady stopped by, and I looked my son in the eye and I asked him, plain, is there anything going on with money, honey? Anything I should know about? Anything I could help with? And he had every chance in the world, right there, to tell me the truth, to sit down at my table and say, Mom, I'm in trouble. I owe some people. I'm scared. And I would have moved heaven and earth for him, the way I always had. Instead, my boy looked at his shoes, and then he looked up, smiled that smile that smooths a thing over instead of telling it. And he said, "We're fine, Mom. Never better. Matter of fact. You just take care of you." And that was the moment. Not the stakes, not the overhear, not even the lean. This, my son standing in my kitchen, given the chance to be honest with the one person on this earth who'd never once let him down, and choosing the smooth lie instead. Something in me went quiet after he left. Not broken, quiet. The way the whole valley goes quiet right before real weather. I took down the phone book and I looked up a number I hadn't dialed in years. And I made an appointment to go see the smartest woman I've ever known. The smartest woman I've ever known is named Meredith Sackett, and she was my boss for the last 20 of my 31 years at that firm. The Sackett and Ambrose and Sackett, silver bob, reading glasses she wears on a chain, and a way of looking at a legal problem like it's a knot she's already half untied before you finish handing it to her. Hollis Ambrose, her old partner. He'd retired years back and moved out my way. But Meredith was still down there 3 days a week, past 70 her own self and sharper than lawyers half her age. I called her office and her girl put me right through. And Meredith said, "Corinne Fenwick," as I live and breathe. And then because she knows me, she said, "Honey, what's wrong?" I went in that Friday with Vern's journal under my arm and the county copies inside it. There was a little dish of peppermints on her waiting room table, and I took one and held it in my fist the whole time, not to eat, just to have something to hang on to. Meredith read it all without a word. The deed, the lien, the whole gray story of it. And when she looked up over those glasses, she didn't give me pity, which I could not have stood. She gave me the truth flat. The way I'd taught her, I liked it back when she was a baby lawyer, and I was the one who knew where everything was filed. "Corinne," she said, "I'm going to tell you the bad part first, and then I'm going to tell you something that's going to change how you're sitting in that chair." The bad part was about what I'd already figured. As long as Grady's a joint tenant, he's a full owner right alongside me. I can't sell the house without his signature. Worse, that lien of his is stuck to the property like a burr, and if his creditor gets aggressive, they can go to court and try to force the whole place sold to collect what he owes. And the ugliest part, the part that put a real chill in me, was the survivorship, the very thing I'd built to be a gift. If I died first, Meredith said, my share wouldn't go to my will, wouldn't go to Wren, wouldn't go anywhere I chose. It'd evaporate straight to Grady, the surviving joint tenant, free and clear, debts and creditors and Sloan and all. Everything Vern and I built our whole lives, gone the instant my heart stopped, into the hands of a man who was measuring my greenhouse for a rental. I sat there and I thought, well, I have really and truly done it now. I have outclevered myself right into the ground. And then Meredith took off her glasses, and she let them hang on their chain, and she said, "Now here's the part nobody in your family is expecting. Corinne, you can undo the survivorship by yourself. Today, if you want. You don't need his signature, and you don't need his say-so." I said, "What?" "It's called severing the joint tenancy," she said. And she explained it to me slow, the way I used to explain things to worried clients. And I'm going to explain it to you the same way, because it's the hinge the whole thing swings on. Right now, she said, you and Grady own that house like two hands around one cup, all the way through. And whoever lets go last keeps the whole cup. But you have the right, all on your own, to cut that arrangement in two. You sign a deed severing the joint tenancy. You record it at the county. And just like that, the survivorship is dead. You and Grady still each own half, but now you own it as what we call tenants in common. Separate halves. And here's what that buys you. She held up one finger. First, the second you sever it, your half stops being a survivorship trap. If anything happens to you, your 50% goes exactly where your will and your trust say it goes. To Wren, not to Grady. You take back the power to leave your own life to whoever you choose. She held up a second finger. And second, once you're tenants in common, You're no longer chained to him inside that house. You have the right to bring what's called a partition action. You go to a judge and you say, I want out. I want my share. And the court can order the property sold and the money split according to who owns what. His creditor comes out of his half, not yours. You walk away with your 50% clean, and you leave him standing there, holding his debts and his lien and his half of a house he can't afford. I sat in that chair, and I felt something come back into my body that had been gone since the Sunday I heard him through the running water. It wasn't happiness. I want to be careful how I say this, because it wasn't a win, not the kind you cheer. It was steadiness. The floor came back under me. For weeks, I'd been a woman trapped in her own house by her own signature. And Meredith had just handed me the one thing I thought I'd lost for good, which was a choice. I told her about the greenhouse then, about Vern and the grafting, and how he'd warned me and I hadn't listened. And Meredith, who is not a soft woman, got quiet. And she said, Corinne, you know what severing is, don't you? In your husband's language. She nodded at the journal on her desk. It's pruning. You've got a graft that took wrong and it's draining the tree. And the only thing that saves the tree is you take a clean blade and you cut the bad cutting loose. It's not cruelty. It's the opposite. It's the thing you do because you want the tree to live. I about lost it right there in her office. Because that was Vern's whole life she'd just put into lawyers' words. Sometimes you cut the graft to save the tree. We spent another hour on the how of it. What to sign, what to record, how to update my trust so my half ran to Wren, safe, where nobody could borrow against it or measure it for a rental. Meredith said she'd draw it all up and I could come sign within the week. And she said one more thing on my way out, gentle. Corinne, once you record that severance, it's public. He'll find out. You need to be ready for the day he does. I said I'd been getting ready for that day my whole life. I just hadn't known it till now. I left that office with a peppermint melted to nothing in my fist and a plain envelope in my purse with Meredith's notes inside. And I drove home a different woman than I'd driven down. Not louder, not angry, just settled. Proof is a quiet thing to carry. It doesn't rattle in your purse. It doesn't announce itself. But it changes the way you stand up out of a chair. Now, here's what I want you to understand about the next stretch, because I know how it looks in the movies. In the movies, she'd have marched home and thrown it all in their faces. That is not what a woman my age does. What I did was harder and a lot quieter. I got everything ready before I said one single word. I went on making Sunday supper. I want you to sit with that. Every Sunday through all of it, I set that table, and I smiled, and I passed the potatoes, while underneath, I was taking my whole life back one careful piece at a time. I met with an honest realtor, a straight-shooting woman named Delia Halverson, who came recommended and who did the one thing that made me trust her before she'd talk price. She sat at my kitchen table and asked me plain, Mrs. Fenwick, is anybody pressuring you to do this? And I told her the truest thing I'd said out loud in months. No, I said. People have been pressuring me to give up my say. That's a different thing. I'm not doing this because they want me out. I'm doing it because I won't spend my last good years in a house where my own boy counted the rooms before I was done living in them. She wrote down a number and told me to take all the time I needed. I went in and signed Meredith's severance, my hand steady on the pen. I updated the trust so my half ran straight to Wren for her schooling, where no creditor and no Sloan could ever touch it. I had a locksmith come rekey the doors, and this time there was no spare on the hook in the pantry, none tucked in the greenhouse. Just one key on my ring and one in a lockbox, because if that old spare had simply been lost, fine, but if somebody had helped themselves to it, well, that stopped now. And I told one other person what I was doing, because Meredith said I'd want a witness I could trust when the day came. I drove over to Hollis Ambrose's place, Vern's old friend, Meredith's old partner, and I sat on his porch and told him the whole thing. And that old man listened the way you'd want to be listened to. And at the end, he just said, Vern would have stood by you. So I will too. You call me when it's time, Corinne, and I'll be there. There was just one thing left I hadn't done, and I kept not doing it. The way you circle a cold lake before you make yourself go in. Because that same week, going through Vern's journal to find the well pump warranty for Delia, I'd finally found it. Tucked in the very back, behind the frost dates and the grafting notes, a folded sheet of paper gone soft at the creases. And on the outside, in my husband's blocky pencil, one word: Corinne, my name in his hand, waiting for me. I don't know how many years it had sat in that notebook, not 3 feet from where I cried most mornings. I held it a long time, and then I put it back, unopened, because I already had all the storms I could carry that week. And some part of me knew that whatever Vern had to say to me from the far side of the grave, I'd want both hands free when I finally read it. I closed the journal. I set it on the shelf above his bench, right where he kept it. And I got up the next morning and made oatmeal, and washed the bowl, and got ready for the hardest part of all of it. Because I'd gotten everything in place. And now all that was left was to wait for one of them to find out. It was Grady who found out first. And it happened the way these things do, on an ordinary evening, over nothing. He came by on a Wednesday after work, and I could tell, before he got in the door, that something in him had come loose. He wasn't smoothing anything over that night. His tie was already yanked open and his eyes were red-rimmed. And when I offered him coffee, he said, "No, Mom, sit down. Please, I need to talk to you." And my heart just about broke right there. Because for one foolish second, I thought, this is it. He's going to tell me the truth on his own. And Lord help me, he did. Some of it, enough to nearly undo everything. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where he'd done his homework as a boy, and he put his face in his hands, and my grown son cried. Real crying, the ugly kind, the kind I hadn't seen out of him since he was small. And it all came out in pieces. He'd lost his job back in the spring, the good one, and never told me. He'd been too proud, too scared. He'd been covering the mortgage on their own place with credit cards. And Sloan, God, Sloan had no idea how deep it went. Or she did and she spent anyway. He wasn't sure anymore. And then a man he'd borrowed from, a real man with a real lawyer, had taken him to court and won. And now there was this judgment hanging over him. This number he couldn't climb out from under. And he was drowning. Mom, he said, I'm drowning and I didn't know how to tell you. I sat there and I listened to my baby cry. And I want you to understand what that does to a mother. Because if you've got kids, you already know, and if you don't, I can't fully explain it. Every wall I'd built came up against that sound and just about melted. Everything in me, 46 years of everything in me, wanted to get up and put my arms around him and say, hush now, Mama's got it. Mama will fix it, the way I'd said it his whole life. And I could have. That was the terrible part. I had the power to fix it. I could have gone to Meredith and torn up the severance and let it all ride. Let him have the house. Let it carry his debt. And told myself that was love. And then Grady, still crying, still with his face wet, said the thing that saved me. I just need to keep it in the family. Mom, he said. That's all. If the house could just, it'd solve everything. Sloan's got it all figured out with the rental. We run the numbers and it works. It fixes the whole thing. And you'd never even have to leave. You could stay right here. We'd take care of you. He looked up at me with his father's eyes gone desperate, and he said, you'd want to help me, right? You'd want to keep it in the family. Keep it in the family. Run the numbers. The rental works. Even drowning, even weeping at my table, my son was still selling me the plan. Still underneath the tears, reaching for the deed. And that was when I understood the cruelest thing I've ever had to understand about somebody I love. He wasn't lying to me that night. Every tear was real. He was drowning, truly. But a drowning man will climb on top of whoever's nearest to keep his own head up, even his own mother, and not hate you for it, and not even fully know he's doing it. That's not evil. It's worse than evil in a way. It's need with no bottom to it. My hand was actually moving. I want to be honest with you. My hand was moving across the table toward his, and my mouth was opening to say, "All right, honey, all right, we'll figure something out." The words were right there. And that's when Wren spoke. I hadn't even known she was still in the house. She'd come with him and drifted off to the back room like she does. And I guess she'd heard the whole thing through the wall. She came and stood in the kitchen doorway, 16 years old, arms crossed tight over herself. And she didn't yell. She just said, "Real quiet, real steady, Grandma." And when I looked at her, she gave the smallest shake of her head, just once, side to side. "No." And then she said the thing I will hear on my deathbed. She said, "Grandpa built that greenhouse so you'd have somewhere that was yours." The room went dead still. Grady's head came up, and I looked at my granddaughter, standing there brave as anything, choosing me right out loud in front of her own father. And I pulled my hand back across the table, and I folded it in my lap with the other one, and I felt Vern in the room with me plain as if he'd sat down in the empty chair. "I love you," I told my son, and I meant it with everything I had. "I will always love you, but I'm not going to drown with you. And I'm not going to hand you my greenhouse so you can float a little longer. That's not help, Grady. That's just two of us underwater instead of one." He begged. I won't pretend he didn't, and I won't pretend it didn't cost me to sit through it. But I'd found the floor Meredith gave me, and I stood on it. And eventually he left, angry now. The tears dried into something harder, and I heard his truck spit gravel all the way down the drive. Wren stayed. She came and sat down next to me and put her head on my shoulder, and neither one of us said anything for a long while. Then she said, "Are you mad at me?" And I said, "Oh, baby, no. You just did the bravest thing anybody's done for me in years." And I didn't understand yet just how brave, or how long she'd been doing it. That came later. I recorded the severance that Friday. Meredith walked it into the county herself. And I knew, the way you know weather's coming, that it would take about a week for it to work its way to Sloan. She's a realtor. She watches the records like a hawk watches a field. It'd show up in her feed like a rabbit breaking cover. It took 9 days. They came on a Saturday morning, both trucks, fast up the gravel. And I was already out in the greenhouse when I heard them, because some part of me had been getting ready out there since dawn. I'd made coffee I didn't offer. I'd laid Vern's journal on the potting bench, and next to it, in a neat stack, everything. The deed, the recorded severance, the county copy of Grady's lien, and a single sheet where I'd written down the date and the time and the words I'd heard through my own running water. Half of it's already ours. Sloan came through that sticky door first, and the mask was gone. I'd never once seen her without it. And I'll tell you, it was almost a relief. "What did you do?" she said, and her voice was flat and cold, and there was nothing friendly left trying to reach her eyes. "You severed it. You cut Grady out. Do you have any idea what you've done to us?" Grady came in behind her looking gray. "Mom," he said, "you can't sell it. Half this house is mine. My name's on the deed. You put it there yourself." And there it was. The morning I told you about at the very start. We'd finally arrived at it. All of us. In the little glass room Vern built to prove he wasn't dying. I laid my hand flat on the potting bench. The wood was cool, and I could feel the old dents his hammer left in it. And I told my boy the truth. "That's right, son. Half of it is yours." And this half finally learned the word no. Sloan started in about lawyers, about how they'd fight it, and I let her run down. And then I turned the stack of papers around on the bench so it faced them, and I put my finger on the severance first. "This is recorded," I said. "It's done. Your survivorship is gone, Grady. When I pass, my half goes to Wren, in trust where not one dime of it can be borrowed against or built on or sold out from under her." I moved my finger to the lien. "And this is what you brought into my house without telling me. A stranger's claim on everything your father and I built, because you were too proud to sit at my table and ask for help. Grady couldn't look at it, but Sloane could. Sloane looked at that lean like she was seeing this number for the first time, and something flickered across her face. And I understood in that second that he'd been hiding the worst of it from her too. And I felt, God help me, one clean flash of pity for my son, standing between two women in a greenhouse, having lied to both of them. I told them the rest plain. The severing was done, and now I was going to sell my half. They could buy me out if they could find the money, which we all three knew they couldn't, not with that lien around Grady's neck. Or I'd bring a partition and let a judge sell the whole thing and split it clean, my half to me, his half to his creditor, and everybody would walk away with exactly what was theirs and not 1 inch of what was mine. That's when the old truck door slammed out front, and Boots came up the walk, and Hollis Ambrose let himself in through the greenhouse door, slow and deliberate, and stood himself right beside me with his hat in his hands. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. He just said, "Morning, Grady." Sloane. Then, quieter, to me. "Vern asked me once to keep an eye out for you, if it ever came to it. I reckon it's come to it." And he stood there, a witness, an old man who'd known this family 40 years, and I felt the last of my shaking stop. Sloane looked at Hollis, and at the papers, and at her husband who wouldn't lift his head, and she did the math the way she does everything, fast and cold, and I watched her arrive at the bottom line. There was nothing here to take. The leverage was gone, and she picked up her purse off my bench, and she said, to Grady, not to me, "We're done here." And she walked out. Grady stayed 1 more minute. He looked at the papers, and at Vern's journal, and at me, and his mouth opened like the boy he used to be, the one who broke something and hoped I'd fix it before his father got home. And for once in my life, I didn't fix it. I didn't think it would go this far, he said. "No," I said. "You thought I wouldn't." And I let that be the last thing, and he went. The house went quiet after both trucks left, quiet in that ringing way a house gets when a storm's just passed through it. And Wren and I stood in the greenhouse not saying anything. She'd been in the back of my house the whole time. Of course she had. She always was. She was crying a little, and I put my arm around her. And I said, "Honey, you didn't have to be here for that." And she wiped her face and she looked up at me. And she said the thing that cracked the last of it wide open. "Grandma," she said, "I have to tell you something, and you might be mad. It was me, the whole time. It was me." I asked her what she meant, and it all came out. That Dane, the contractor, he really did call the house. But Wren hadn't just happened to answer. She'd been picking up my landline on purpose for weeks, whenever she was over, because she'd heard her parents talking, and she'd gotten scared for me. She was the one who told me about the sidewalk. She was the one who, a few days before that, had seen a permit application open on her mother's laptop with my address on it, and taken a picture of it with her phone and left the phone where I'd, quote, happened to find it, except I never did. I'd just noticed the ADU thing on my own by then. Every strange lucky break I'd chalked up to God or gumption those weeks. Half of them were a 16-year-old girl quietly leaving doors open for me because she didn't know how else to warn her own grandmother without betraying her own parents. I don't know how to tell you what that did to me. This child, caught between the two people who made her and the grandmother who loved her, and she'd found a way to protect me without ever once saying an ugly word about her mom and dad out loud. She'd just, in her grandfather's way, left the truth where I'd trip over it. I held her right there among the seedlings, and I told her she was the bravest, best person in this whole sorry family, and that none of what was broken was one bit her fault. And she cried like she'd been holding it since summer, which I suppose she had. And then when she'd settled, she looked over at the shelf above the bench, at Vern's journal, and she said, "Are you ever going to read Grandpa's letter?" Because she'd seen it too. Of course she had. So I took it down, and with my granddaughter sitting right beside me in the greenhouse he built, I finally opened the letter my husband left me. It was dated the summer of 2016, the summer I signed the deed against his wishes, the summer he built these walls. He wrote, "Corinne, if you're reading this, then the thing I was afraid of has probably found you, and I'm not there to sit with you through it. You put Grady's name on the deed today. I couldn't talk you out of it, and I've never been able to talk you out of much. It's one of the 10,000 things I love about you. But I've watched that boy his whole life, and I love him, and I know him, and I know he leans on whoever's standing closest when the ground gives. I'm afraid someday that's going to be you, and you won't see it coming because you never could see him clear. Mothers can't. It's not a flaw. It's just how you're built. So here's what I need you to know. From wherever I am, it won't be your fault. You did it out of love, and there's no shame in a thing done out of love, even when it goes wrong. But sweetheart, if it comes to it, you cut it loose. You hear me. You've spent your whole life keeping everybody else's roots watered. You're allowed to save the tree. Take care of yourself and take care of that granddaughter of ours. She's got more sense than the rest of them put together. And don't you dare let guilt sign your name to one more thing. I'll be in the garden. I'm always in the garden. Love, Vern. I want to tell you I read it stone-faced. I didn't. Ren and I sat in that greenhouse and bawled like a couple of babies, holding on to each other. And it was the first time since the funeral that crying felt like something being set down instead of something being carried. Because he'd known. Not that Grady would do a specific wrong thing. He wasn't a prophet. He was just a man who paid attention. He'd known the shape of it. And he'd forgiven me for it 5 years before I ever needed forgiving. And he'd told me, in his own words, that pruning a bad graft isn't a betrayal of the tree. It's the last act of love a gardener's got. The rest went the way real life goes, which is to say slow, and paperwork heavy, and without a lick of drama. The partition took months. Grady never could come up with the money to buy me out, not with that lien around his neck. And in the end, worn down and out of moves, he signed what needed signing and let the court sell the place. My half came to me clean. His half went where his half had to go, to the man he owed, and if there was any left after that, I never asked. Delia handled the sale gentle and honest, and I never once let anybody rush me, because I'd been rushed in my own home long enough, and I wasn't about to let even my freedom hurry me out the door. Grady and Sloane didn't make it. I won't pretend that surprised me, and I won't pretend I mourned it much. When the money got tight and the leverage was gone, whatever had been holding them together turned out to be mostly the leverage. Last I heard, she'd moved back toward the coast where her people are. She never apologized. She sent me exactly one message, months on, that said, "We never meant to make you uncomfortable," and I read it twice and set the phone down. Uncomfortable. That was her word for it to the end. I'd been useful, and then I'd been inconvenient, and then I'd been an obstacle. Uncomfortable didn't even scratch it. But I let her have it. Some folks, the kindest thing you can do is stop expecting them to be sorry. I found a little place across town. Smaller. A patch of yard. Good light in the kitchen. And out back just enough room for a greenhouse, about a third the size of Vern's. I had the movers take the potting bench, dents and all. I took the journal. I took his letter, and I keep it in the top drawer of my new desk where I can put my hand on it. And on a cold Tuesday in the spring, before I ever left the old place for good, I went out with Vern's pruning knife, and I took a cutting off that grafted apple tree, one clean green shoot off the branch that always gave the best fruit, and I wrapped the end of it wet the way he taught me. And I carried it across town in a coffee can on the seat beside me, and I planted it in the new yard. It took. It's growing. Some mornings I go out there and I put my hand on that little tree, no bigger around than my thumb, and I think, there you are, cut loose from the old trunk and doing just fine. Better, even. I put my half of that house into a trust for Ren, for school, where nobody can borrow against it, and nobody can measure it, and nobody can call it ours who isn't her. And I set a little aside sides. A small scholarship in Vern's name for older women going back to school, because he always said a person ought to have a way to stand on their own feet, even when their knees are shot. He'd have liked that. Grady calls sometimes. I answer sometimes. We are the two of us, learning a new way to be a mother and a son, one where I love him all the way and I don't hand him the keys to anything. It's slower and it's cooler than what we had, and it's a great deal more honest. And I've made my peace with that. Love and access aren't the same thing. It took me 72 years and nearly my whole home to learn it, but I learned it. Wren comes every Saturday she can. She brings iced tea from the place by her school, and we water the little apple tree together. And sometimes she asks about her grandpa, and I tell her how he burned toast and blamed the toaster for 40 years. There's one key by my front door now. One. On a little wooden hook. No spare hidden anywhere. For anybody. Some folks would call that cold. I call it mine. If you've made it all the way here with me, I want to leave you with the one thing the garden taught me, and then I'll let you go. I planted my son's name on that deed the way you plant a tree too close to the house, meaning to give shade, and getting roots in the foundation instead. For years I called that love. But love and control look the same in dim light. The difference is only this: whether the other person can still grow without you, or only around you. I'm 72. I don't have decades left to be careful. So now I keep one key by the door, and I give my trust the way Vern gave water. Freely, but never to something already drowning me. If you've ever confused being needed with being loved, I hope you learn it gentler than I did. The garden taught me the last lesson. Sometimes you cut the graft to save the tree, and the tree forgives you. It grows anyway.